The title of this podcast is Success Has a Way of Insulating Us. Most recently, I watched a documentary on Apple TV on Sydney Poitier. It was fantastic. He is an accomplished actor who passed away recently, and his films are unbelievable. My mom introduced me to him when I was a small child, and ever since he's been my favorite actor. And his passing was celebrated by anyone who's ever watched his movies. He is incredibly talented, and he's also humble and gracious. And in watching the documentary, his daughter talks about him regarding his how he showed up for her, what she learned by the way he moved through life. And what she said, one thing I really admire about him is, you know, a lot of time when an actor's career is starting to wane, they will grasp at whatever is coming their way because their drive is to stay relevant and to keep working as an actor. And my dad, he doesn't have any of that. What a compliment, right? Right? When you think about it, to be striving and grasping for things that are outside of you, that are external, to make you feel good inside. And he didn't have any of that, is what she said. After she says this, Sydney Poitier comes on screen and says, I chose to step away. You know, in life, one ought not to wind up in one's last moments and be faced with the fact that maybe one has spent one's entire life in a narrow corridor. And my career had been wonderful for a great number of years. I don't say that it would have continued at that pace it was going, but if it had, it would rob me of the chance to be a fuller person, you know. And I think about any challenge that has happened to me. In the past, I resisted and suffered because I resist the reality of what was happening, that that part of my journey was over. And with it closing, another door opened. I didn't start to see things that way until I really began to practice, until suffering brought me at that crossroads. And I began to do the practice that I appreciate what Sydney says there about success placing you into this narrow corridor. And that's with our relationships, it's in our careers, and it's our life. But if we're conscious, anything that's not to our liking, it becomes an opening. And an opening is not narrow at all. It doesn't have to be. If you're conscious, it becomes this spacious sky of possibilities. And that has certainly been the case in my life, that the challenges have led to something greater, bigger for me that I couldn't have possibly seen because my focus was so narrow. When I think about what happened with ToBeRe 8 years ago, it actually ended up being liberating for me. I mean, what brought us to that point, I'm not proud of at all. It was unfortunate. I've apologized about my role in that many times, but it became an opening to what my life is like now, and those possibilities continue to, to grow of what I'm experiencing every single day. And because I work on myself every single day, my corridor is narrowing. Every time something happens in the form of a person, a manager that I now have to report to was a different style than what I'm used to, that my ego says, I don't like that style. By saying that, and then adopting that narrative, I put limitations on what my experience is going to be with them. It becomes a narrow corridor. And because I've had several different people that I have began to report to at Mayo Clinic, and I've worked on myself with accepting their management and leadership style exactly how it is without requiring them to change anything, but for me to work on myself. By doing that, our relationships are expanded to where it's been like beautiful to work with them. I've learned so much, and we benefited from working together that could have never happened before if I was working with that narrative, which was placing me in a narrow corridor. Well, because I did, I had to grow. And I'm a different person thanks to them showing up just the way they were and me accepting that. And you can take this to everything else, the challenges in your life. If you have a child who's going through some challenges, or some of them being real challenges and other challenges being they're not doing what you want them to do, dress the way that you think they should dress, hair color being a certain way, date who you think they should be dating, study what you think they should be studying. If they're not doing that, or if it's something more serious like addiction, whatever it is, that part doesn't matter. What matters is you see that situation as an opportunity for you to go deeper on working on yourself into your practice, so you expand your corridor of possibilities instead of narrowing it. Because if you expand it, if you have to work with the challenge, which begins with acceptance of it, you will see more possibilities on how to deal with that. And so I invite you to take Sydney Poitier's words and use them as guides. And that is, don't be attached to the way things are right now. Be open to whatever unfolds in life, accept it as it is. And I'll just read this one more time with what his daughter said and leave this with you. One thing that I really admire about my dad, a lot of times when an actor's career is starting to wane, they will grasp at whatever is coming their way because their drive is to stay relevant and to keep working as an actor. Insert doctor, insert manager, leader, coach, parent, spouse. And my dad, he doesn't have any of that. Sydney Poitier comes on screen after his daughter's finished talking, and he says, I chose to step away. He didn't step away from life. He stepped away from ego, from that egoic identity that he was this famous actor. He says, I chose to step away. In life, one ought not to wind up in one's last moments and be faced with the fact that maybe one has spent one's entire life in a narrow corridor. Insert your identity as I'm so-and-so's mom, or I am this person at work. Those are roles that you have to be playing in that particular moment. And my career has been wonderful for a great number of years. I don't say that it would have continued at that pace it was going, but if it had, it would have robbed me of the chance to be a fuller person, If I would have stayed in the financial planning when the market was roaring and my income was continuing to increase, that would have been a very narrow way of living, because all I would have known is success. I wouldn't have grown. I wouldn't have been challenged. But because it didn't last, and those things don't last. So that's one of the reasons you don't hitch your wagon or your happiness or your joy to things that are outside of you, to the external world. But because it didn't last, it challenged me. I didn't get the lessons then because I repeated some of them later. But once I started to work on myself, I became wise to it. And that financial challenge helped me be more responsible financially today. The same thing happened with relationships. Man, I was not my best. I was 1.0 in a lot of relationships, but because I finally got to the point to where I was going to work on myself in relationships, and I wish they were different, not, end them abruptly and walk off, or, just kind of let them die out without having a conversation, because I stopped doing that, or requiring my significant other to change and be different, to whether it was they had to be a certain body type or they had to be whatever. Hey, you can still have your preferences of what you like and what you're attracted to, but for you to be limited by that is a completely different story that only causes you suffering and creates more distance in your relationships, in your friendships. And I gave that up. I worked on myself. So as my partner, showed up more and more differently than what my mind said they had to be, I worked on that within me. And eventually I got to the point to where I accepted my partner for exactly how they showed up. I didn't settle. No, I just expanded the corridor in which I saw their beauty. And that became a gift because I started to see that with everyone else. And that became a gift, which meant I got to enjoy people because I got to see a fuller picture of them as opposed to seeing them through my limitations. And so I invite you to detach from any identity that's limiting for you so you can experience a wider, broader, fuller corridor that life has to offer.